When we look at Darth Maul across different points in his life, it's easy to focus on the extremes. In Star Wars: The Clone Wars, he comes across as unstable, reactive, and heavily driven by anger. Even when he's trying to build power, there's still a sense that he's not fully in control of himself. Then, when we see him later in Star Wars Rebels, that presentation is very different. He is more patient, more calculated, and much more deliberate, especially in how he handles someone like Ezra Bridger. For a long time, that shift felt abrupt. It raises an important question. What actually happened between those two versions of himself? With Maul Shadow Lord, we're starting to see that transition in detail. This version of Maul finally shows us how that change happens.
This is a Fulcrum Side Quest mini-sode. Short, focused opinions on psychology and storytelling, personal reflections, unscripted thoughts, maybe even some of your suggestions. Here's Fulcrum.
Welcome to Side Quests, a mini-sode series from Dark Character Profiler. These are the detours, the hidden trails off the main path, where we explore the overlooked, the unexpected, and real-world psychological echoes. Let's get into today's side quest. Before we get into this, I do want to mention that this episode will include some spoilers for Maul Shadow Lord. So, if you haven't seen the full season yet, you may want to come back to this after you've watched it. Section 1. Control through manipulation, not force. One of the first things that stands out in this series is how Maul approaches power. In earlier versions of the character, control is often established through force or intimidation. If someone is in his way, the response is immediate and usually violent. In Shadow Lord, that approach shifts. For example, when Maul infiltrates the precinct to kill Ludivario, he doesn't just carry out the act and move on. Instead, he makes a decision to spare him in exchange for something useful: help in assassinating Marg Krim. What this shows is a change in how Maul evaluates situations. He's no longer focused only on the immediate outcome. He's starting to think in terms of utility and long-term gain. Instead of asking, how do I eliminate this problem? He's asking, how can this situation be used to my advantage? That's a very different mindset, and it's one of the clearest indicators that his thinking is becoming more strategic. Section 2. Patience and long-term planning. Another major shift is the level of planning involved in his actions. The bank robbery on Janix is a good example of this. On the surface, it looks like a simple crime, but it's actually designed to provoke a larger conflict between rival crime lords. That tells us the goal isn't the robbery itself. The real goal is the reaction. Maul is setting events in motion and allowing other people to respond in predictable ways. He's creating chaos, but it's controlled chaos. Later on, when he infiltrates Marg Krim's stronghold on Obadiah, that same pattern continues. He doesn't just eliminate the target, he installs a puppet leader in his place. That decision matters because it shows he's thinking beyond the immediate moment. He's not just removing obstacles. He's restructuring systems so they work in his favor. That level of planning requires patience, and patience is something we don't consistently see in earlier versions of Maul. One way to really test whether that shift is fully developed is to look at how Maul responds when things stop going according to plan. In the later episodes, he is dealing with multiple pressures at once. He is outnumbered, facing 2 Inquisitors, dealing with betrayal from someone he was working with, and at the same time managing a physical injury. Earlier versions of Maul would likely respond to that kind of situation with immediate escalation. What we see here instead is controlled decision-making. Even while injured and cornered, he makes a calculated decision to collapse the cave using the force to stop pursuit. That moment is important because it shows that the control we're seeing is not just situational. It holds even under pressure. Section 3. Emotional control, not emotional absence. It's important to be clear about what's actually changing here. Maul has not lost his anger. That emotional foundation is still there, and we see it come through in different moments throughout the series. What's different is how that anger is being handled. For example, during confrontations with Devon Izara, there are moments where Maul could escalate immediately, especially when she resists or escapes. But instead of reacting impulsively, he engages with her psychologically. He tries to influence her thinking. He challenges her perspective. He attempts to pull her toward his ideology instead of forcing compliance. That restraint is significant. It shows that there is now a separation between what he feels and how he acts. And that separation is where control develops. The visions he experiences after escaping the cave add another layer to that. He is not just recalling his past. He is reliving key moments, including his recruitment by Darth Sidious, the abuse he endured as a child, and the loss of his brother. What that shows is that these experiences are still actively shaping how he understands the world. His actions are not just driven by strategy. They are influenced by those experiences. So while his behavior appears more controlled, the emotional foundation behind it has not changed. It is just being directed more intentionally. Section 4. The beginning of manipulative relationships. Maul's interest in Devon is another key part of this transformation. Earlier in his life, relationships are often transactional or rooted in dominance. There's very little subtlety in how he interacts with others. In this series, that starts to change. He doesn't just try to control Devon physically. He tries to influence her psychologically. He presents himself as someone who understands her situation. He positions his worldview in a way that could appeal to her, especially as she becomes more isolated and uncertain. By the later episodes, we even start to see signs that she's being influenced by that approach. That also starts to change how Maul frames what he is doing. Instead of presenting his actions purely in terms of power and control, he begins to position them as a way to prevent others from experiencing the same kind of suffering he went through. That shift matters because it makes his perspective more persuasive. He is not just trying to control someone's actions. He is trying to influence how they understand the situation itself. That dynamic becomes even more important in the final episodes. After Daki's death, Devon is in a highly vulnerable state, and Maul uses that moment to influence her decision-making. He offers her a path forward that aligns with her emotional state, framing it in a way that feels justified given what she has just experienced. This shows that his ability to manipulate is not just about control, it's about timing. He understands when someone is most susceptible to influence, and he acts in that moment. This is important because it connects directly to the version of Maul we see in Rebels. His ability to guide, manipulate, and build influence through conversation rather than force doesn't appear out of nowhere. It developed here. Section 5. Adaptability in changing environments. Another major factor in this transformation is how Maul responds to pressure. When the Galactic Empire, through figures like Inquisitor Marek, begins to take control of Janix, the situation becomes much more restrictive. There are checkpoints, increased surveillance, and a more organized effort to eliminate him. Earlier versions of Maul might respond to that kind of pressure with direct confrontation. Here, we see more adaptability. He withdraws when necessary, repositions himself, and chooses when to engage rather than reacting to every threat immediately. Even after being wounded and separated from his allies, Maul is still able to recover and continue operating. That ability to re-engage rather than collapse under pressure reinforces the idea that his behavior is no longer purely reactive. It is adaptive. Even his return to rescue Devon from Merrick is calculated. It's not just an emotional reaction. It's a decision made within a larger context. And that outcome, a stalemate, reinforces something important. Maul is no longer acting without considering the risks. He's measuring them. Section 6. Why this version of Maul is more dangerous. It might seem like a more controlled version of Maul would be less of a threat. But psychologically, that's usually not the case. When someone who was previously impulsive develops control, they don't lose their capacity for harm. They become more effective. They're harder to predict. They are more capable of executing complex plans and adapting when things don't go as expected. What Shadow Lord shows us is not a reduction in Maul's danger, but an evolution of it. He's still driven by the same underlying motivations. He's just better at acting on them. The final episodes of the season reinforce that idea in a very direct way. When Maul is confronted by Darth Vader, the situation reaches a level of pressure that goes beyond anything he has faced earlier in the series. In that moment, we see exactly how his transformation has gone and where it stops. He is capable of working alongside others when it benefits him, but he is just as willing to abandon them when it doesn't. When he pushes Daki toward Vader to secure his own escape, that decision is not impulsive. It is calculated. And it shows that while Maul has developed control and strategy, those traits are still serving the same core motivation. Survival, power, and influence remain the priority, even at the cost of others. Closing. What makes Maul Shadow Lord important from a psychological standpoint is that it fills in a gap that had been missing for a long time. It doesn't change who Maul is. It explains how he becomes who we later see. The anger is still there. The past is still there. None of that is removed. What changes is how things are managed. And once that control is in place, everything else starts to shift with it. That's the end of this side quest minisode. Thank you for coming along with me on a journey off the beaten path. See you next time.
That's it for today's side quest. If you have any topic suggestions, send us an email at darkcharacterprofiler@gmail.com. Don't forget, Dark Character Profiler returns next week. Thank you for listening.